Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Just One Word with Jan, the broadcast where we truly believe that one word from God can change the direction of your life forever. And I just want to let you know that I'm not live today. This is a recording that I recorded yesterday. So for those of you that are joining me live, please do still put your comments and questions in the chat, because I will get to them and respond to them. But I'm traveling tomorrow and Naomi is working tomorrow. So we decided this will be a good opportunity to pre-record, which I've only done twice in the past, not with another person. So this is a good experience for us to record a program, and it kind of opens up the whole sphere of things for us for the future. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Naomi. Welcome, Naomi.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here.
It's so lovely to have you here. We were just chatting a little bit before the program, and I was trying to ascertain whether I knew you before you were born or as a toddler, because, you know, I'm getting older. Dad was there to rescue us and remind us that we started, your dad and I started working at Hampstead Bible School of Faith, as it was in those days, in the September, as you were born in the February. So there we go. So I knew you while you were just a baby in your mother's womb. So it's great to see the kind of young lady that you've grown up to be. And it's wonderful. How did you, let me start off by saying this, talk about who you are, your family, etc., so that introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you, Jan. Yeah, my name's Naomi. I have a little son. I'm married as well to a lovely God-fearing man called Joe, and my son is called Asher. We named him because we really felt like in these times where things are very difficult, and Asher was a place where there was always oil, even in drought. And so that everyone could still celebrate Passover and still worship. And in these times where oil in the church is perhaps harder to foster with so much distraction around, relationship with God, deep spiritual experience and connection and intimacy with Jesus is something that's so important. That's why it also means joy and laughter, which is great because he does have a lot of joy and laughter. And I'm a counselling psychologist as well. So that's my professional life, which is a huge part of me. And it's a real privilege to be able to walk with people and journey with people who are in hard moments, seasons of suffering, that Jesus is already there ministering to them. And I partner with him. And it's, a gorgeous opportunity to be alongside others who could do with knowing a bit more love.
That's great. I mean, you grew up in a Christian home, and how much do you think that influenced the direction of your life? I mean, do you feel that was a bonus, a benefit, or a hindrance?
Ooh, growing up in a Christian family was incredibly powerful, because it established me in lots and lots of experiences of being in intimate relationship with Jesus. So knowing what it felt like to experience his presence, his manifest presence, was very addicting, because it's the most incredible feeling in the world. And I wanted to chase after that. So that was something that really rooted my interest. And I kind of, at 18, I really wanted to see how far I could go with this on my own without my parents around, because I appreciated that there was so much that they were impacting in the way that I saw the world and my faith. So I really wanted to kind of go deep in being truly a friend of Jesus, because I knew that he was the one that brought so much more joy in life to me than anything else. I was surrounded with at school with lots of people who were struggling, and so it kind of wised up to that quite quickly. I was aware how much suffering there was in the world, and so I was also aware of how important it is to be connected to the father of life. So I went to IHOP when I was 18, the International House of Prayer, which massively impacted on my life, and joined the Night Watch, which because it was cheaper. So on my gap year, I really got into prayer, and that was one of the happiest times. It was so much fun, and really realized, oh wow, you can go deep. If you allow God to have your attention, it gets really, really good and fun. So that's probably one of the sort of stories of
So
early.
I was going to say, do you remember a time where you actually specifically made a decision for Jesus, for yourself?
I think that during my teenage years, I went through a phase of making lots of decisions, like kind of doing, oh, I want to recommit, because it's so confusing when you're little and you go to school surrounded by non-Christians, but you've just spent all of Sunday worshipping really openly and outwardly, and then suddenly you're like, how do I have language for this? I don't, because the moment I say I have a relationship with Jesus, you just get laughed at, and everyone knows that you're a pastor's kid as well, so you're a weirdo from the beginning, you know. So there's a lot that is very challenging to try and navigate without feeling the duplicity of it, as being very hard to make sense of. The part of me that goes to school and sort of stays quite quiet and careful, and the part of me that's loud about God at church, was very confusing. So I was often giving myself back to like, Jesus, I recommit, I am a Christian. But I don't actually remember any time where I wasn't believing, just because I was so privileged to be able to grow up in a church where the presence of God was really, really prioritized, and Bible was very, my dad, I would often ask him, like, tell me what this means, and he would often say, I want you to dig your own well, Naomi. Go back to the Bible, and God speaks to you as much as he speaks to me. He can. So go and sit in your room and ask him, and he will tell you, and you read the Bible. And mum and dad taught me something that was the most powerful tool I think they ever did for me and my sister, was they gave us notebooks and they would say, write down your name and then I love you afterwards. So it felt a bit narcissistic, to be honest, actually, writing my name and then I love you. And then we would be encouraged to write whatever we felt we heard, like anything that went through our mind at that moment. We would just write it all out, trusting that some of it was what God was telling us. And then afterwards, my mum or dad would go back over through just to see if there was anything that didn't align with Bible. And then we would kind of cross that out because that wasn't accurately aligned with what God would be saying. And then gradually a process of practicing that as much as possible, like most days, eventually it became a lot easier to hear God's voice. And then that became the sort of focal point of my life, as really enjoying being able to lean back and be like, okay, God, what are you saying? And there were seasons where I absolutely didn't hear anything, but there were seasons of, oh, this is nice, I can really, there's an ease to it as well, but always knowing that he's speaking to all of us, and we're just not always very good at hearing, and there's lots of reasons for that, and he's really good at being patient with us, but he's amazing at talking to us, and he has so many thoughts he wants to share us. So yeah, that's probably the thing that I was impacted in most growing up.
So is that kind of how you got led into the prophetic? Because that's kind of where you lean, isn't it?
Yeah, I love the prophetic. I definitely feel like it is like a pinwheel. Like the more you lean into it, the kind of the more in the river you feel. Like the much easier it is to do. But yes, I feel like I would have to admit, very bored a lot of the time at church, and I'd be sitting on the front row, so I couldn't just nod off. And I'd just be like, oh, I just want to watch TV, or because as a kid, you're not going to be stimulated by repetitive things. So I would often say, Jesus, please, can you take me on an adventure? And we would just go off in my imagination, and then that sort of became a coping mechanism for me of like, talk to me, or I'd start writing what I felt like he might be saying, and so yeah, it was just a sort of coping mechanism thing, and then it became quite fun because then I'd be like, oh, I think maybe God's saying this, and we'd lean into it a bit.
That's great, and what a great way of doing it. I mean, parents that are listening, watching this, why not start that with your children? Give them a piece of paper and a pen and just say, let God speak to you. and write it down, and then take the time to go through it with them. I never heard that. I had no idea that's what your parents did, but I think it's a brilliant idea. And a lot of pastors' kids go off the rails. They, and sometimes I think it's because the parents have been less instructive and more destructive, actually, but controlling. And yet your parents gave you a mechanism through which you could personally develop, and they were saying, you can hear from God, you can do this. And so, I wonder if that is one of the reasons why you didn't go off the rails. You stayed on track because you learned how to press into Jesus early.
I think so, maybe. I think there was, Mum and Dad will tell you, they are imperfect humans. It's okay to, it wasn't.
No, just if you want to know how imperfect me and your mum are, just mention marzipan.
I know. There was all sorts of ups and downs. I was a difficult teenager. I was not. My sister was the older firstborn, classic, a wonderful example of mum and dad's parenting, like really beautiful. She absorbed loads of the let's embrace and submit to authority and obedience, and I was like, but what about this, but why, and I was always questioning, and I always sadly, having a prophetic gifting does mean that you're discerning of things before you have the responsibility and the maturity to know what to do with them, so you're kind of really difficult to be around. And mum and dad were very patient. They both have mercy giftings, which really helps. But they were very patient with me when I was very, I would say, cruel things to my dad, particularly. And he was so forgiving. He'd always be the first to apologise when we had an argument. So I think being kind to ourselves through, particularly as parents, through the whole process of the up and downs of the teenage years. Because when I went to IHOP, I didn't even tell mum and dad how I was doing. I just went there and I didn't even contact them. I was like, I want some space. So my parents didn't even know what was going on for weeks. And they're like, you have to tell us, please. And I got back from praying all night, being like, whoo, this was an amazing time. And then on all the doors of the dormitories was Naomi Van Gundy, you need to contact your parents. And I was mortified because, as a teenager, like, oh my gosh, everyone knows. So I was not an easy child. And I definitely think that being a pastor's kid, you absorb a lot of, you self-impose lots of pressure on yourself, even if your parents are doing their absolute best to protect you from that. Just because people come up to you and they say, oh, because we see you're doing okay, we know this is a church we want to go to. And that does really heavily weigh on a little person before they know what to do with it. So I think that for me, it's been really interesting experiencing sort of Christian therapy to process some of that heavy burden bit that I took on myself, so that it doesn't sort of take away the joy of the good stuff that was in being a pastor's child. So I think there is a definite two sides of the story.
Well, I wasn't a pastor's child, but I was a pastor and the mother of a couple of kids, and I know the pressures they came under, and I don't have the mercy gift. I'm an exhorter, though, which means I'm an encourager, and so I tried very hard to give my kids space to grow and make mistakes, but I looked at a lot of people, that the kind of church that we were part of in those early days, a very mixed church, very mixed in every way, just with age, ethnicity, backgrounds, all coming together in a real melting pot. And a lot of the traditions came over, and I would meet a lot of parents who were hard with their kids. And and I would say to them, the problem is that when you're like that, as soon as they're old enough, they'll go and rebel. Got to give them space to make mistakes. And they were so concerned about the spiritual state of their kids that they thought by imposing laws on their kids, they would keep them safe. But it actually works out exactly the opposite. The message, I love the fact that you used to write your name and then I love you, because I love your name, because that's the biggest message for me. That, listen, I don't always like what you do. And I remember my daughter in her teenage years, she'd been, born again, spirit filled, worshiping, just on fire, prayed for the sick, seen miracles, and then she went totally off the rails. And I remember her, crying and saying, Mom, I know you don't approve of my lifestyle, but I know you love me. And that for me was so precious. So I can imagine how your mum and dad were when you went off and, wouldn't have contact, because, no matter what my kids do, they're still my kids. And I got that from just looking at, no matter what I do, I'm still God's kid.
Yes.
He still loves me.
Yes.
And, sometimes, usually when I preach anywhere, I say to people, turn to someone and say, God loves you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Because, and then I say, turn to the other person on the other side and say, God loves you too much to leave you the way you are. Because that is so true, isn't it? So it's always like a two-edged sword. You've got the solid representation of Jesus in your parents, but you also got the side of, everyone, the pressure coming from everyone. But the pressure you put on yourself is probably the biggest pressure of all.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Well, you've got good representation for when your kids when Asher starts growing up. What a great name! I had no idea what that meant, and I was going to ask you where you got it from. I know it's in the Bible, but I had no idea why you chose it. So that's great. It's good. And I know your mum and dad are loving being grandparents right on the doorstep. I'm older now, and my granddaughter's 13. She's the youngest, and she shows up in our house early in the morning and says, "Granddad, I'm going to be late." And Granddad then gets up or gets out and takes her to school. My grandson goes to the same school and walks every day. He walks there and back every day. But she's like, "Granddad." And being a granddad with a little girl, twisted around his little finger,
Always.
And then he says, "Oh, I'm a taxi service." And I always say, don't complain about what you allow. So, so you went away to school. What made you decide on psychology?
I was very, very angry on God's behalf sometimes when I would see people who were suffering with mental health, and it felt like their will had been taken away. Suffering with extreme delusions, not being able to be in contact with reality in lots of ways. And it felt like even God doesn't take away people's will. How dare the devil be able to take their will away so that they can't say yes to Jesus? So, my views on that has slightly shifted, but at the time, that was the massive motivation, was I want to be able to reach people who had never stepped foot in church, who are struggling, and Jesus loves to minister to them, and he's already chasing after them. And I just would love to be there, because there's a real sweetness that you experience of Jesus when you're sitting with someone who is in a really hard place, because Jesus he loves to minister to us when we're wounded. I love partnering with him. So I was always someone who people would talk to, and I was always good at getting people to share things that perhaps at the time they weren't ready to share. And I was very empathic, something that my mum particularly fostered or nurtured. But I definitely needed to learn how to steward those giftings well. I was definitely clunky with them, and that got me into trouble sometimes. So I knew that I wanted to professionally train to understand how to do it as best as I could. And I wanted to, be able to see Jesus in really dark situations where there was a really longing for relief.
When you first decided to go down the route of secular, whatever that means,
Yeah.
psychology. Did
Yeah.
you come up against any kind of negativity from church people? Because, you know, I still know people that go, oh, psychology, that's, you know.
Yeah, definitely from both sides. You know, non-Christians are very much like, oh, being a Christian and, you know, being a psychologist, that means that you're going to hold certain views, and is that okay? And then from Christians saying, you know, you're going to lose your faith and this isn't okay, and, you know, you need to pray for the, you know, spiritual things first, and the soul needs to just follow. Then you don't attend to the follow, you know, soul, because Jesus has already done that, you know. So there was lots of fear, I think, that would be activated. And there's also been, you know, psychologists who have done really terrible things, and therapists who have maybe misused their role and authority. So of course there's, you know, wounds that get triggered when you say, I am a psychologist. But
Yeah.
your mum and dad were very sweet, even when they had friends of theirs who were like, you shouldn't let your daughter, you know, they were really leaned back out of that fear and would kind of be like, we appreciate that there is something that we will be praying into. And there is, you know, it is tricky because there is lots of things within secular psychology that butt up against, or, you know, butt heads with so much of true theology. But then there's so much that's completely wonderfully compatible and actually very biblical. So it's, you know, like all of these things, we need to be spirit-led, otherwise it falls flat.
Absolutely. And, you know, I dabbled a little bit in psychology years ago. I did a diploma because I felt that as a pastor, understanding the way the brain works could only benefit me, because we're God's creation. And even at that level, I found a lot of people going, oh, no, you don't want to dabble in that. You know, it's almost like it's witchcraft, you know. Which is so sad, because actually a lot of people in church don't realize that they are leaning into the psyche and psychology. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I think it's basic misunderstanding of what the Bible says about the soul. You know, we need to be dealing with the soul, because although we're spirit, soul, and body, we're made perfect in the spirit. We don't need to build the spirit. We don't need to feed the spirit. We don't need to do anything with the spirit. All the work is done in the soul. So, you know, the more we understand it, the better it will be. So, right, well, I'm going to take a break now to play. I'm going to play my daughter's song, being as we're talking about parents and daughter. This is my daughter singing, Kelly Obich-Tasker.
You walk on water, they blind men see.
Oh, there you go. My daughter. So, well, Naomi, who are the people that you minister to most at the moment? I mean, in your work.
Mm-hmm. So I work with 8 to 18-year-olds at the moment, and families, and so I partner with lots and lots of families in the NHS at the moment. But then I also specialise in trauma therapy privately. So anybody who's experienced something that has shattered their belief of what life would look like for them has experienced a trauma, and so understanding how to grow and adapt so that they can allow that experience to fit into the puzzle of what they expect in life, so that they can have post-traumatic growth and be, in a way, so much more strong and full and rich in life than they were before that happened. That's the trajectory that I like to walk people along, because I believe that when we allow God into the spaces where we have experienced pain and trauma, we actually allow him to pour personally out of his heart his love into the deepest places in us in a way that is very hard to open up on our own. So being sort of bound to Jesus through that pain, through that sorrow and wound, is an incredibly transformational experience, because it means that we are so authentically connected to Jesus and so deeply rooted in Jesus that it's very fulfilling experience, but it's hard work. So it's only for the brave, but it is very, very fun.
So is that where your email name came from?
Yes, the braving. Yes, so that's the a big part of what I feel is, God's calling us to be as, to be his. It requires bravery and courage, but he gives that to us because we can trust in him, and that otherwise it's just foolishness.
Yeah. So you deal with children then, 8 to 18. Do you come across, I mean, what's the main stuff you come across in like young adolescents? What's the main thing you deal with?
Yeah. So the trauma work is with adults usually, but the young people that I work with, it tends to be anxiety, depression, and sometimes sort of psychosis, or just difficult to explain experiences and low-level trauma. It tends not to be the chronic, very, very extreme sexual abuse that cases that I work with separate to. So I have two jobs. So the trauma job and then the general mental health job is with the children. But I tend to see that the loneliness that we all are experiencing right now, because we are on our phones, we're so disconnected from each other in some ways. It can be very pervasive, and then bullying at school feels like it's on steroids in some ways, because it never stops, because it's constantly through that phone, it's continuing all night long rather than just at school. So the intensity of the difficulties that I experienced when I was a teenager, it feels like they've ramped up. But then the access to support has also increased, which is really fascinating. So the level of need is a lot greater since COVID, I think, and the difficulty of finding language around that doesn't actually, it seems like it would be easier because everyone's talking about psychological terms very naturally these days, like, oh, it was so traumatic getting to school today because it was so busy, but actually people being able to find the language that really feels like they've conveyed what they're experiencing in a satisfying way, which is so necessary to be able to feel heard and validated, is really hard for young people right now. And so I feel like creating safe spaces for them to be able to really not be okay and notice the parts of them that feel very, very shut down and alone. And it is particularly difficult, I think, with the Christian clients I have. It seems even more challenging sometimes for as a Christian to recognize that there's a part of me that I know in my head doesn't align with what I believe and doesn't align with the Bible and what Jesus wants me to say and what my parents are thinking. So it's very easy to say, okay, I'm going to shut that part down. I'm going to numb it out by eating or by zoning out or by scrolling on my phone, or, you know. And so the parts of us that we really don't like, it's almost like we're more determined to get those quiet if we really want to be a good Christian as well. So it makes it almost doubly hard to have then the safety to say, I'm going to allow myself to notice the part of me that feels like I don't want anyone to know about, the part that I feel ashamed about. Because when we allow ourselves to notice it, we can then be in contact with it and then in contact with Jesus. It's hard to be authentically connected to Jesus when we don't allow ourselves to be authentically connected to all the parts of us, the wounded parts, the angry parts, the parts that are just enraged about something or really, really sad about something that we feel maybe in some ways shouldn't matter. And actually, it means so much more than what we think it does. So, yeah.
Wow. And does that include like young people with like ADHD and stuff like that? Is that the kind of thing that you would come
That
across?
definitely includes that. Yeah. So lots of neurodivergence. So young people with autism, ADHD, or ADD. That's very, very prevalent at the moment. And there's lots of reasons that that can be understood. But everybody, regardless of neurodivergence, regardless of the label that they might have been put on them, they all respond so well to love and attention. So and self-compassion. And it's very hard to be self-compassionate or compassionate to other people if we're not being that way to ourselves, because we might not like all of us. And so that's usually the crux of the work, even if they have neurodivergence and their mind works in a very different way.
Yeah, it's quite difficult. My grandson was diagnosed with both being on the autistic spectrum and ADHD, and he's medicated actually, but he's socially inept, but he's such a loving boy. I mean, very sharp when it comes to, his conversation, when you can get him to talk, is really good. But I've got no idea, you might shoot me down on this, whether it's right or wrong, but my daughter said he came home this a few months ago. He came home, he was supposed to decide on his options for something, and he started getting really angry with himself and saying, I'm rubbish, I'm stupid, I'm this, I'm that. And my daughter just gets very upset. She doesn't know how to deal with it, really. She says, Mum, Finn is saying all this to himself. So I just prayed and I thought, okay. So I messaged him, best way to connect with him. Messaged him and I said, meet me after school at the co-op. So I drove down to the co-op. So he walked to the co-op. He got in the car. He said, what's this about, Nana? I said, we're going to Starbucks. I hate Starbucks, but he loves Starbucks. So he said, oh, okay. So we got to Starbucks, sat there. And we sat there, he got his sandwich and his drink. And I said, Finn, I've got to talk to you about something. He said, what? I said, I heard you've been saying nasty things about my grandson, and I'm not up for it. And I said, my grandson is loving, he's kind, he's clever. I said he can fix a computer. I said, I said, he's a special boy. And I'm not up with somebody saying bad things about him. And I could see a little smile on his face, like his head down. And I said, so can I depend on you not to talk bad about him anymore? And he said, yes, Nana. So it was just, I thought, hey, I don't know if it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but it's
great. I've got tears in my eyes. I feel so touched. That was so beautiful, because that was modeling what he needs to do for himself, is to speak back to the thoughts of the enemy and to say, I am not that way. This is the truth. And so you were just modeling that, and he can internalize that now and remember, actually, no, I remember grandma says this about me. So it's, you know, I hold a different view. And that's often the case, is when we have this sort of critical thoughts, it's hard to have anything in response if that hasn't been modeled to us. And we also need to be kind of tenacious, like you did, of being like, no, I'm not going to take that on, and having the same amount of energy back. Because if we just whisper it back, it's very, very hard to hold on to that. When we feel like we're in.
I'm glad I didn't do anything wrong there.
No, that was wonderful. That was great. You didn't tell him after thinking that. You would explain this is not okay. And also, it's really important to have a hard line with being like bullying of ourselves and saying, no, that's not allowed. Because when we take that seriously, then they understand how seriously damaging it is. So it's wonderful. I think that was beautiful. I wish more people would do that. It's really
he's not always the easiest, but you know what? He's always loving. He is, you know, he never comes into a room that I'm in without he comes and hugs me, tells me he loves me. And so loving to pieces. He's my you know, kind of he's my daughter's oldest child, and he's so different to my granddaughter, who I'm still waiting for her to learn that she's a girl. She wants to be a pilot, you know, so she's you know, she's more gutsy than any of the boys put together, you know. So but I just think that's you know, the work you're doing is so valuable, because there are so many kids that do feel like that. So do you do any online stuff, Naomi?
Do I do online
stuff? Yeah,
I do. That's majority of my work, because it's just so much easier and it's more convenient for everyone else as well.
So is the email the best place to get in touch with you? So like if a parent has got children or a child who is struggling in this area and they don't know what to do, then they can get in touch with you on your email.
Yes, no, totally. There's so many really practical and easy steps to take that can really disentangle what seems like an impossible knot and a web of mystery. Psychology is definitely not as mysterious as it seems. And the path to relief and sort of harmony at home doesn't have to feel so far away. Honestly, it is a lot. There's a lot out there.
I think some parents need a bit of counselling as well, because it's very difficult when you're with a child, when you've got a child like that who is contrary so much of the time and non-responsive. And I know sometimes my sister's husband sometimes can get very frustrated with the way Finn is. And I'm trying to say, calm it, you know, don't let him wind you up. Because sometimes it can be a very combative arena, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. And these children, like, we love them so much. So they activate big feelings for us because we care. It's not because we don't. It's because we actually feel so strongly that we want the best for them. We want to help them. We want to connect to them. So when we don't feel like we are succeeding, it seems like we're failing. And that's a horrible feeling to have. It's a horrible place to feel stuck. So it's a very normal thing to be really frustrated.
I can remember being frustrated with my daughter. I remember, you know, this is perfect, Pastor Jan. I remember my son holding me back while I was saying, "I'll kill her." She just knew what buttons to press, and yet today we're the best of friends. And
no, absolutely. Oh my God! Even my 1-year-old this morning, you know, chucked my bowl of cornflakes and milk all over the carpet, and then threw my really expensive, beautiful, like, thing that I use for timing and therapy, chucked that against the wall. It broke, so there was like white spirit everywhere, and I was so angry. I was like, I just need to step away. I can't even look at you. And I've never done that before, but it's so, you feel so awful, you feel so guilty, but actually it's human, and we all have these moments where we feel, oh, there's not much in my tank today, and I feel empty already.
I remember when my son, who is now 53 this month, I remember when he was about 2, we lived in Cyprus, and I went downstairs early. I could hear noise downstairs, went downstairs, and he'd opened the fridge and taken almost everything out of the fridge, and it was smashed on the floor. And we left the chip pan on the cooker the night before because we'd had friends around and we'd had left it to cool, and he got it. And of course, because it was Cyprus, it wasn't solid fat, it was kind of, and he was stirring Nesquik into the fat, and there were flies everywhere and ants everywhere. And I'm like, yeah, and my husband came downstairs and took me by the shoulders and turned me around and pushed me up the stairs and said, "Go." And he did. Because it was Cyprus, we always, after dinner, we always cleaned it everywhere, because otherwise you got ants. And so, we cleaned, everything was perfectly clean, and he was making breakfast. Looking back, it's funny, but at the time, but I just
not funny as well.
Go upstairs, stay there.
Yeah, and praise God for husbands with wisdom like that. We need those husbands.
Absolutely. So how did you meet Joe?
I met him when I was at uni. I was in my second year, and I saw him at church. I was helping with the students at church, and I needed a lot of kind of practical things, like a driver to get us to socials and a camera to put things on social media and all the rest of it. But I just saw him across the aisle at church, and I remember knowing, I'll marry you. There's something in me that knows that you are my husband. And then I met him, and we did not get on, but I needed his help to get my sort of social events for church happening. So we sort of started working together, but he thought I was incredibly immature and young. So I acted pretty childlike. I don't think I was terribly immature, but I was, 21. And this is like 12 years ago. And then he seemed really, he would say he was quite prideful at the time, and I didn't find that attractive. So we did not kind of gel. And so I thought, I must have not heard God. That must have been wrong. But then very quickly, I really fancied him. I really, really liked him. And I was like, oh God, please, can we start dating? Would he ask me out? And then I got so frustrated that he didn't ask me out immediately that I was like, okay, God, give him to you. I give up. And I was very cold to him the next Sunday at church. And then I think he twigged at that point that I was like very cold, that suddenly I or maybe she wants to be more friends. And so we started dating, but because we'd like brought up in the purity culture church, we took it very seriously. And we were all very much like, we have to be very careful and answer all these questions in this premarital book. So we kind of laugh about it now because it was so intense. But 3.5 years later we got engaged and got married. But it's been a real
that's great to know. You weren't in a hurry, but God knew the perfect timing. That's great. Right, I'm going to play something else from a group of girls, 2 girls called Hope Jean. They're again children of parents, and I've known these girls since they were tiny. And their dad is the singer and musician in the family, and they very much take after him. So Shara and Carla, they're Hope Jean. So this is Free Living.
Because it's too far to fly, and the road ahead feels too hard to even try. I wanna be free, I need to be free, free living in you. I wanna be free, I need to be free, free living in you. Now I know that you've always And even in the mess I made, you still had grace to spare. You lift my head with an honor I don't deserve, and you clothe me in robes for royalty reserved. You set me free, you set me free, free living in you. You set me free, release me to be free living in you. Make me whole again, bring hope again, heal my soul within. I just can't make it on my own. Make me whole again, bring a hope again, heal my soul within. I just can't make it on my own. You set me free, you set me free, free living in you. You set me free, release me to be free living in you, in you, in you. Oh, you set me free, you set me free, free living in you, in you, in you. Oh, you set me free, release me to be free
And they are also pastors' kids. So, and
So many of them.
so you know, it's great. Their parents pastor a church in Staines in Middlesex, and I watched them grow up too, and you know, become. They're both married now. One of them has got a little girl that was in the picture there with her husband, and so great. I was just thinking while I was playing that, I must get them both on actually, because God has really worked in their lives too. But Naomi, we've got about 10 minutes left. So what I'd like to do is for you to talk about your ministry. We've talked about your work, which of course is a ministry in itself, but you preach and prophesy, and just how did that develop, and what's the main focus of your ministry?
The main focus of my ministry is encouraging and supporting and impacting, hopefully, people to be able to learn how to develop more affection for who Jesus is to them than what Jesus can do through them. And it's something that Jesus has really been convicting me of, is being true friends of Jesus means that, yes, there is hard times, there's lots of drama trials, and it's not plain sailing, but when we want to be with him just for who he is, because he is, it's so beautiful to him. The incense of our worship, and incense is basically wood that's been drenched in essential oils, so it doesn't just smell of burning when we pray. Because of that oil of intimacy that we have, our sacrifice is such a pleasing balm to Jesus's wounds. It's so soothing, and it ministers to him. And I'm really passionate about in supporting others who want to be Jesus' friends, to know what that looks like and know how, because there is so much distraction and there's so many other things that make it almost terrifying to be in silence or in quiet with just Jesus. But actually it's such a beautiful experience of life, and a posture to hold if people are willing to take a narrow path. It's something that I really feel called to, and I love to support others and partner and kind of come alongside anybody else who also has a conviction that they also want to take the narrow way of loving Jesus in that way. So yes, that's I'm always up for sharing when I feel that God has said yes. I know previously I would always say yes to every opportunity, and then one day God said, I actually didn't ask you to do that. It's just a good idea. It doesn't mean that you're allowed to go for it. So I'm trying to be better at leaning into what Jesus is sort of encouraging. But that is my ministry. I feel sometimes if we are able to engage in therapy, it's easier to be aware of all the different parts of us being connected to Jesus, and there's a lot of self-awareness and emotional intelligence that is needed for spiritual maturity. But absolutely, it's definitely evolving, and I'm definitely young in this as well. So I'm still learning in my ministry how to minister to Jesus and to sort of be true to what he's actually asked of us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think so many young people are so desperate for, quote, ministry, unquote, that they don't pause to say, not just young people, older people too, but they don't pause to say, is this what you want, Lord? Is this where I'm supposed to be going? And also sometimes other people are more desperate for you to get the opportunities than you are to get them. You know, people see the gift in you and they want so much for you to have, oh, why don't you do this? And why don't they let you do this? And why can't you, and actually it's like, it's cool because it's all in his hands, and he'll make the way where there seems to be no way. And he'll open doors that no one can close, but he'll also close doors that other people want to open that's not right for you. So it's a real mature step to say, hold on, let me only do what he says. And not only is it mature, it's wise, because hey, if you go off on your own, it's going to be hard. But when you go his way, it's so easy. Yeah, so that's great to know that you've learned that, and you're learning that. And none of us have got it, none of us. All of us are learning every day. And I remember saying to the Lord one day, the day I become unteachable is the day I become unusable. I'm always learning, and I don't ever want to be someone who is always learning but never comes to the knowledge of the truth. I always want to recognize that on my own I can do nothing. In him I can do all things, but only the things he says do. If he doesn't say do it, you might as well give up now. So it's really a joy to see how God is moving in your life, and how doors are opening. And I know your dad is so proud of you. He's like a new dad with a newborn, like, hey, look at my baby. So yeah, he's so proud of you in the way that God's moving in your life and developing. And do you have a website, Naomi?
I do. I can bring it up. Let me just so my therapy account is on the counseling directory under Naomi Aston, but everyone can just email me, and that's probably easier, or on LinkedIn.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah, because if I've got, I could have got website off you and put it up at the bottom instead of having my tape. But but at least this way you've got your email up all the time, so people can see that, which is great. And these days it's easy for people to just email and find out what your availability is, what your charges are. And I'm sure there's lots of people that could do with, if nothing else, do with a chat to find out what's available.
Totally.
Because I just pray that God opens more and more doors for you in both arenas, the preaching, and I know your dad will be right there kind of knocking on doors for you, because he is so proud of you, but also in your ministry work, because it isn't just a job, it really is a ministry. And you did mention that you have like non-Christian clients, or people that have been hurt by church. Just tell me a little bit about that before we close.
Yeah, there are lots of people that I work with who have been, I mean, everyone I'm sure can say I've had a moment where I felt really hurt by someone in the church, or a system within a church organization. So there are, totally understandably, lots of people who want to get healing from that, because Jesus has asked us to love the local church. So that can also mean that sometimes it feels very scary and also maybe triggering to be thinking about working with me when they know that I'm also Christian. So it's always really important at the beginning to just establish that this is a safe space, and this isn't a place for judgment. This is a place for meeting mercy and a sort of a healing opportunity to be able to be free of that, so that we're not rooted in pain, we're rooted in love, and we don't have to be hanging that narrative hanging over us any longer. But it's so easy to sort of not be aware that we're frustrated with church because of something that hasn't quite yet been processed in us yet. Because church is imperfect and we are imperfect, and we're all trying our best and doing the best with what we have, but that sometimes falls short, understandably. So yeah, that's a lot of people I work with.
Yeah, I can understand that. I know a lot of people are unhappy, and they want to blame the church, or the people in the church, or the processes, as you say, for what's going on inside themselves. And it's kind of stepping out of that blame game, isn't it, really?
Mm-hmm.
But knowing that there is healing, and that Jesus wants us all to be whole, and recognize that, one of the things that I learned many years ago is that when you point your finger that way, there's three pointing back at you. And so, it's recognizing there ain't anybody perfect, especially not your pastor. So
it's interesting, actually. There's research that interviewed loads and loads and loads of pastors, and what came out of the research was that actually who's pastoring the pastors is often a question that's not asked enough. And actually the expectation on the pastors for the psychological well-being and psychological support they're expected to offer is absolutely overwhelming. And so we often, without even knowing, we put these church leaders on such extreme pedestals and have such extreme expectations that disappointment is obviously going to come. But being able to support pastors in the ways that they feel they are called to is very different to saying, you are the mini Jesus in my life. So it's very hard to do, and it takes a while. But I think lots of pastors also could do with just a safe space to be able to express, oh, wow, I was expected to provide therapy for someone that I've never really felt called to counselling or doing any of those things.
Yeah. Naomi, we've run out of time. I'm really, really thrilled to have had you join us today. I'm going to play us out with another pastor's kid. Let's do this again sometime.
Lovely, thank you. It's been a real honour.
Thanks everyone for joining us. And if you need to contact Naomi, her email address is on the screen, and you can play it back to find out what it is. Okay. God bless you. Have a great weekend.
Love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up till I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God.